Hi folks, this is Daniel Garza and welcome to another episode of Put It Together. I'd like to start as usual thanking my producer, Mr. Kevin Morris, for all his help and support. Thank you, sir. Inviting everybody to check us out at abnormalentertainment.com, where you can find all the shows on the network. Go check it out. Also, you can find me at Put It Together Podcast on Facebook and now on YouTube, Stitcher, Twitter, Instagram, and iTunes, I think. Yes, go check those out. I'm not reading my script today, so I kind of forgot. But I want to start off, and we're going to start because I'm pretty sure we have a pretty interesting story. I'm at Radiant Health Centers here in Irvine? I always thought it was Santa Ana, but it's not Santa Ana. It's Irvine. Mm-hmm. And I'm with Philip Yaeger. Excuse the airplanes. We're very near the airport. Yes, and is that how you pronounce it? Yaeger?
Yaeger.
Yaeger.
Yes.
You're the executive director and CEO of Radiant Health Center, formerly known as AIDS Services Foundation.
Yes.
Cool. How you doing, sir?
Doing well. Doing well. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you for your time. I
Absolutely.
appreciate this.
It's my pleasure.
And your new office space. This is really
Yes.
cool. People listening, you won't be able to see the office space, but for those of you watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see behind him. This is all these. I was telling them that this used to be where we did our treatment, our therapy sessions, mm-hmm. and where we're sitting now is where I would come in for therapy. So if these walls could talk, there's a lot of stories here. And I was trying to think about how we met the first time, but I think it was probably through an ASF event or something.
Mm-hmm. That sounds right.
Where I first saw you. And I do know this for sure. I didn't know who you were. I only knew you by name. Mm-hmm. And me being me, I probably acted goofy or something and said something dumb. And then later on, I was like, oh my God, that's Philip. Like, oh, okay, cool. Like, okay, well, you can't take back whatever you said. So I hope I didn't embarrass myself too much.
No.
I'm going to say no since I'm here in your office. So that's going to be... well, I want to get started because I know part of your story, mm-hmm. and I want my listeners to hear. Tell us how you put it together.
Sure. So I have been with what is now Radiant Health Centers, formerly AIDS Services Foundation, Orange County, for 25 years. And I first got involved after a friend of the family suddenly passed away of a lung infection. And I realized that, 30-year-old young men don't die of lung infections, and asked, well, was it HIV? Was it AIDS? And, we don't know anything about that. Within 30 seconds, I realized, no, this friend of the family's had died of AIDS. And I then realized that they had done so without the support of friends, of family. The stigma at that time was so heavy that they dealt with it in complete isolation. And I just thought no family should ever have to, do that, deal with the tragedy of losing a loved one, but then having to do so in silence and without the support of friends and family. So I thought, I want to do something. I want to get involved. I don't know what to do. I picked up the phone, I dialed information, I was connected, said, connect me to an AIDS organization. I first got connected to the county. They tried to get me to come in for a test. I said, no, you don't understand. I want to volunteer somewhere. And so they had connected me to AIDS Services Foundation. And so that's where my involvement with the organization began 25 years ago as a volunteer. I would come in one day a week for 4 hours, and I would do basic filing. And although it was very simple work, I realized that it was important, that even the smallest little tasks or duties that needed to be done around the organization was critically important because of the work that was being done, the lives that were being impacted. So I was very fortunate then within a 4-month period, a position came open. Here at the agency, we had received a $25,000 grant from the Elizabeth Taylor Foundation, half of which was to go to purchasing food product, and the other half was to hire a part-time food pantry coordinator. And I was fortunate enough to be hired into that role. And then within 6 months, my position was expanded. I was given responsibilities for public relations, and the rest, I guess you would say, is history.
Yes.
Over those next 25 years, I held probably 8 or 9 different positions within the organization. And then 10 years ago, in 2008, was promoted to the CEO role.
Wow.
So for the last 10 years, have been serving in that capacity.
Wow. Okay. So it seems quick, but there has to be many ups and downs through the whole journey. I'm trying to use my math here. So 25 years ago,
93.
93. Okay.
Yes.
Good. Thank you for the math, because I was going way going back from that. Now 93. By 93, it's been about 10-ish years that HIV was out and people were talking. But what was the climate around HIV at the time?
Yeah, that was a very difficult time. In 1993, protease inhibitors hadn't yet been introduced, so we were still dealing with one medication, AZT, and it wasn't very effective for a lot of folks. And we lost on average a client a day. 30 clients a month.
Wow.
And so this was before we had email service. You would come in on Monday morning and there would be 5 or 6 messages on your phone, messages from loved ones who had lost their friends, family members over the weekend. So it was very difficult. We all were here in great support of each other. Because we knew that the work that we were doing was so difficult and so challenging. But at the same time, we knew that it was critically important, the work that we were doing,
right,
and that we were really having an impact on people who had nowhere else to turn, who had nowhere else to go. So in those days, yes, very different, very challenging. Around 1995, 96, as the new medications and protease inhibitors came out and became available, we really began to shift our thinking. We then went from helping people die with dignity to really helping and showing people how to live with HIV. And we really began to build out our wraparound or support services that would allow people to stay in care and on treatment. So really began to focus on housing resources and what we needed to do there, nutrition services.
Right.
We went from being just basic comfort food to help people with taking their medications to what does healthy eating and cooking look like?
Right.
And how could we change up what we were offering through the food pantry for people who are now approaching their HIV in a much different way?
Right. Now, one thing I find interesting in the way you're expressing is you say people, because most folks have an idea that at those times the only folks that were dying were gay men. But as I've gotten involved more in HIV advocacy and activism, I come to learn that it wasn't just gay men that were dying. What was the demographic at that time here in Orange County?
Yes, that's a good question. And you think about the early years before we knew how to screen donated blood. We were serving a lot of people who had been infected through blood transfusion, who were hemophiliacs.
Right.
Kids, teenagers,
right,
who had been infected through blood transfusions. So we saw a lot more people who acquired HIV not through sex, but through, again, either hemophiliacs receiving blood transfusions or people who had received blood transfusions during surgeries or operations.
Right. So
there was a bit of a different mix. As well, we saw people from the heterosexual community as well who were being infected. So things have shifted, but at the end of the day, and 30+ years later, men who have sex with men still account for the majority of new infections in this country.
Yeah, I appreciate the way you expressed it, because I think a lot of folks do forget. Not to mention the Ryan White Planning Council and the The committee itself started because of a young heterosexual male who received a blood transfusion.
Right.
So I tell people, you do know that Ryan White wasn't like an adult gay man. He was a kid, and most people don't know that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when I do interviews with folks in services, it's always it's always mentioned gay man. And I'm like, but there were more people than that. Some people didn't know that that's where, till the very end. Some folks didn't realize that that's what had happened. But ultimately, in the end, people found out that it was HIV/AIDS that did it. Yeah. So thank you for saying that, because I think it's going to make a big difference in the way people remember the history further down the line.
Right.
What were you doing before you were volunteering, or what were you working? What was your career path?
Right. I was in transportation management.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So something completely different, definitely in the for-profit world. At the time that I began my volunteer work here, I was working in transportation management. And at the time that I was offered the part-time food pantry coordinator position, I continued in the transportation industry because it allowed me to do both.
Okay.
But I knew I couldn't do both for very long. I knew I would burn out within 6 months. So I thought, well, let me just give this a try, and I'll figure out where I'm supposed to be. And within 3 weeks, it became very evident that this is where I needed to be. And so I really set about figuring out then how at the end of 6 months I could ensure that I was making enough to be able to live comfortably working here at ASF.
What was the message, and how did it get to you?
The message regarding...
that this was the path that you were going to go on.
Oh, boy. So I think as I would come to work here, it was very clear that none of us were here to make stockholders wealthy, or for a business owner, for any individual or a family. We were here for the community. We were here to help the community because the community needed us. And so there was not that sense of dog eat dog, or, climbing that corporate ladder. Or my experience in the for-profit world was this constant reminder of our mission and why we're here, and we didn't need to do that here. Everybody walked through the door every day, and we knew exactly why we were here. We knew exactly what the work was ahead of us that needed to be done. We knew that we weren't necessarily going to get the platitudes and gratitudes for, making money for the company or increasing, the stock prices, but that what we were doing was going to have an impact in the lives of our community members. And so that for me made it very clear that this was the work that I was to do. What
did your family or friends think about you leaving a for-profit job for a non-profit job? Because for those of you listening or watching, you don't go into advocacy for the money. Everybody knows that you have to really have a passion for whatever it is that you want to do.
Right.
Otherwise, it's not going to work out.
Right.
But what was the reaction around you?
It was interesting because at first, even I remember my father saying, "Aid services, what kind of aid?" And I said, "The disease AIDS," and he said, oh, wow, okay. So they were a little bit surprised, but at the same time, I think they could see that I was very passionate about what I was doing. And in all honesty, they had set an example of community service for my entire life growing up. So I had always seen them involved in the community, volunteering at the church, doing whatever they could for their community in whatever way they could. And so I think for them to see me living that out and living that in my professional life was something that made them proud.
Right.
So,
were there any personality changes in you as you stayed here longer?
Yes, definitely. I would say I've become a much more compassionate person, much more patient individual. and hopefully less judgmental in how I approach, people, different groups, populations of folks who may be different from my own. So I would say in that way, it's made me a better person, a more well-rounded individual.
Yeah. Well, before I say what I was going to say, do you think that having started as a volunteer in the food pantry, having that direct contact with clients was like the best foundation you could have had to now be in the executive director position?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really prepared me for this role was the fact that I was involved in so many of the other service areas. So part of why I was hired, I believe, as the food pantry coordinator was because the executive director at the time had a vision of creating and implementing transportation services.
Okay.
So they knew that I brought that background, that experience. It would be an easier walk for me to do it. So very soon after joining the agency and doing what I could around the food pantry, I then developed the transportation system that operates today. Once that was in place, I then began to focus on housing services. So developed and grew our housing services. From there, I took on HIV prevention work, secured our first CDC grant, began providing HIV testing offsite, and then introduced HIV testing on-site here in Irvine.
Oh, wow.
And then after that, began to focus on community outreach, both engaging the faith community as well as the Latino business community, because we knew those were two communities where members were greatly impacted by HIV and AIDS, but they as organizations hadn't really wrapped their arms around that fact and began to do work. So really working with them on education and awareness efforts. And so by the time I got to the opportunity to move into the CEO role, I had a lot of experience in what the services looked like, how they were developed, what the needs of the community were, how those needs had changed over my 15 years of experience with the organization,
Right.
and how we as an organization had changed our focus. Again, from helping people die with dignity to helping people live with hope with HIV to focusing on preventing new infections. And today we as an organization are focused on not only ending the HIV epidemic, but creating a healthier Orange County.
I think in my career path, anytime I've had a job where I was a leader or at the front of people, it was always because I managed to navigate through the different positions getting to that point, which was always a good thing for me to say. Anything I ask you to do, I've done.
Yeah.
So I know that you can do it.
Right.
And so I admire, because a lot of times we do have, over the 18 years that I've been positive, and from Texas to here, going through different organizations or interviewing people or going to conferences, I have bumped into directors who had never been to the agency, never mind work anything, and they really don't have an idea of what it takes to make it. And I think that's where the unrealistic expectations start happening, and you get disgruntled employees, and things just don't work out. Anyway, for those of you out there, this is the perfect way to do it. So take a note right there. How has the face of HIV changed in Orange County in the last 25 years?
Yeah, good question. So what we don't see today are perinatal infections. So infants in utero or during childbirth being infected. What we don't see are people being infected through blood transfusions. What we continue to see is an increase in new infections in the Latino community, and very specifically in the age group of 25 to 34. So most of the other age groups, we're seeing declines or a leveling off, with the exception of that age group 25 to 34. and with the exception of the African American community or Black community, where new infections have leveled off, but again, in the Latino community, they continue to increase.
Well,
So we know that we still have some work to do with the Latino community, as well as with the Black community and all communities of color.
that's always interesting to me because we 1990s we saw that like high numbers where medications and people weren't getting tested and people still had this idea that they could just have sex unprotected. Then the 2000s, early 2000s came along and we were like, okay, I think we've got this under control. Then all of a sudden, young people numbers started rising and the senior numbers started rising. Here's my idea. It's like, I feel like, because I'm 47 now, I feel like those of us in the 40s, 30s up, we kind of remember the scare of not knowing. So we kind of take care of ourselves. Even being positive, you still want to take care of people around you. But the younger generation and even the older generation that was past, I guess, the anonymous sex periods of their lives at that time, I don't know how else to put it, but I feel like let's talk about the younger people. I feel like the younger people, since they weren't there for the scare, they weren't there for the impact moments, they've come along when medication is available, have lost, I don't want to say touch, but are unrealistic of how dangerous HIV still is. What's your thought on that?
So if you think about it, anybody under the age of 30 has never known a world without HIV.
Right, I say that a lot, yeah.
Right? So if you're 30 years old, chances are you remember hearing about HIV in the news, hearing about Magic Johnson, all of that. When we go out and do presentations in high schools and colleges, the response from the students when they hear that HIV has only been around for 35 years is remarkable. They're shocked.
Yeah.
Like, what? We just assumed it's always been around. And when we tell them this is a disease that's come up in our lifetime and we can end this epidemic in our lifetime, that really is shocking and surprising to them. But it's an important message that they hear and that they understand and that they realize that we don't have to have HIV still affecting our communities 10, 15 years from now. There's no reason why we can't end the epidemic in our various communities. So that's a whole piece that they have never known. Again, what a lot of them do hear is, oh, there are medications now that take care of this. Oh, it's a pill a day. But what they don't understand is that taking a pill a day for the rest of your life is a heavy burden, that there are still side effects from these medications and long-term side effects are unknown, and that medications don't always work ideally for everybody. So we really try to educate young people that although treatment may be good, you don't want to be on treatment. You'd much rather prevent getting HIV in the first place.
Yeah, I find that because I do the presentations for schools also, and high schools, colleges, universities, and they're always excited to tell me that, there's a one day pill. I'm like, 1 day pill. I'm like, yeah. I said, I'm not on it, but I know of it. But I'm like, but I also have, and then I go down the list of everything that all the prizes that I've accumulated over the last 18 years, like cholesterol and heart problems and weight problems and it's depression and stress. And they look at me and they're like, but you're standing here. I'm like, yeah, it takes a lot of effort to look this pretty for a presentation, but you don't get to see me when I go home and I'm like on my couch. I'm like, I'm not moving. The only thing I'll get is the door because food has been delivered. What's your message to people who underestimate how vicious HIV still is?
Yeah, I think the best message we can put out there and that we can give youth is that this is a disease that they're not. What is the word I'm thinking of? is not destined for their community or for themselves, that they have some control, that they can prevent HIV through the use of PrEP.
Yeah.
Providing them with the education that says, we don't have a vaccine yet, but we have a way and a tool that you can use to prevent yourself from being exposed to HIV in addition to condoms. And so we try to tell them that with the knowledge and the tools that we have today, the really best course of action for them is to protect themselves, to understand how to do that, and to effectively do that, to ensure that they're sharing that information with their sex partners so that they can live a long and healthy life, and they can be part of us ending this epidemic in our lifetime.
In a perfect world, we would have no problems getting messages out.
Yeah.
We probably wouldn't have HIV or AIDS to worry about. But since we're not there yet, there's still problems with self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
There's still problems with peer pressure,
Mm-hmm.
alcohol, drugs,
Mm-hmm.
that affects younger people.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thought on that? How does that make it more difficult to get the message out?
Absolutely. And that's part of why we have gone through the process of rebranding from AIDS Services Foundation Orange County to Radiant Health Centers. Is we knew that if we are truly going to end this epidemic in our community, we know we provide great services to people who are HIV positive. We know that we do a good job at preventing new infections, but if we really want to end the epidemic, we needed to address the health inequities in the LGBT community. And that means reaching out to those young members of the LGBT community before they've been infected with HIV. And not just providing them with prevention messages and condoms, but also addressing all of the social determinants that affect their health outcomes, whether it be lack of housing, lack of access to health care, or lack of access to a provider, a medical provider who truly understands the unique needs of the LGBT community. And a provider who's willing to address the substance use issue, not simply as a substance abuse issue, but as a risk factor for HIV.
Yeah.
And so understanding that a young gay person who's out there using substances is putting themselves at higher risk for HIV infection really helps us then look at, okay, a more holistic approach, an approach that says we're going to address all of these health factors, because in essence what we're doing is we're preventing HIV by doing so.
Yeah, because I always feel like it's like having a tire with a hole in it, and it's already had a patch, and you take off that patch to cover the new hole. Well, now you have to deal with the old patch and the old hole, and you just keep going around the tire until you get just tired of the tire, and then you don't do anything with it. Because I was a teenager and I was sexually active, and I believe in my head that I was about 18 when I was first exposed to HIV. Mm-hmm. This is late 80s. And I think about myself at that time, and I start to think about all the mental stuff that was in my head. Not to mention just the teenage stuff,
mm-hmm.
but the gay issues.
Yeah.
And then the cultural background, the religious background, and everything that I had to deal with in my head. And the escapes that I found was drinking and having sex, mm-hmm. which led to more frustration, because now you have to hide that from your family. So it's this big wheel. Mm-hmm. In your thoughts, what do you think, where do we stop the wheel first?
Yeah.
Or is there a spot?
Yeah, I think rather than stopping the wheel, it's first understanding that it is a variety of issues. That if we really want to prevent new infections, prevent somebody from getting infected or prevent somebody who's HIV positive from infecting others, we need to address them in a holistic manner. We need to be talking about their spiritual health, their mental health, their financial health, all of these various areas. And if we're not addressing those areas, then I don't think it's realistic to expect somebody to change behaviors and suddenly they're not going to go out and put themselves at risk for HIV. They're not going to have unprotected sex. Right? So again, I think it's taking a holistic approach to the individual and understanding that we really need to address all of the various intersections of health for individuals that might put them at risk. So again, whether that be behavioral health, whether that be their physical health, mental health, whatever the issue may be.
Is that one reason that really getting to know the clients is so important?
Absolutely. If you don't have the kind of relationship with the clients you're serving where they feel comfortable being completely honest and open with you about their life, then you're not going to be able to address those issues. And I'm just so proud of the staff that we have here and how effective they are at really building rapport with clients, building trust, and really approaching their healthcare as a partnership and something that they're doing together. Yeah.
So we're talking a lot about the younger folks. What about LTSs that I call long-term survivors? They think, well, I've been told I'm a long-term survivor after almost 18 years. I don't think so, because I've met people with 25, 30, 35 years, and they're still kicking and moving and shaking up the world. Tactics between dealing with a newly diagnosed and a long-term survivor.
Yeah. So, a newly diagnosed individual, if I've got a young 20-year-old who comes in, who tests positive for HIV, and we know and can determine that they haven't been living with HIV for long, we get them connected to care and on treatment, there's a good chance that they will live a normal, healthy life and never have an AIDS diagnosis. Right? So I have young people who maybe come in and get newly diagnosed who haven't had any type of illness, no hospitalization. They might need connection to mental health services to be able to deal with this new diagnosis they have. They may need a few other services, but they're going to just continue to go to work, continue to thrive and survive. And as long as they get on treatment and get their viral load to an undetectable level, as I said, the current models show that they would live to be 78 years of age, whereas a normal, healthy male would live to be 79 years of age.
Right.
So within a year of a normal, healthy lifespan. With a long-term survivor, you may have somebody who's been on disability for years, who's been on medications for years, has some negative physical effects from the various types of medication or being on medications for a length of time. Some who may not be real comfortable getting back into the workforce out of fear that they may get sick or ill again and then have to go through that whole process of getting onto benefits and securing benefits. So there are just a whole host of complications for a long-term survivor that somebody who is newly diagnosed and immediately connected to care and virally suppressed is probably not going to face.
Yeah, because pause for a second here.
Yeah.
But after 18 years, and I'm on disability, so a lot of stuff that I get to do is because I don't have a regular job. But I definitely feel like I have an edge to myself. Seeing all these new things changing, seeing all these opportunities that the younger generation, I mean, not that I want anybody to get infected, but seeing newly infected folks and like a 1-a-day pill, more intake information, more access to mental health, like all these things that they have right off the bat that I didn't get in 2000 when I was diagnosed. I'm kind of like, why did they get all this now? Which I'm glad they do, but I can see where somebody who's got at least 15 years on it, you kind of learn to manage yourself. You kind of learn your body. You know what you're capable of. But do you see? Is there a look of fear that I've noticed? Do you know? I mean, do you recognize that? Like in old long-term survivors who went through you only have so much time to live, and then they pass that by 20 years, and there's still this look of when is it going to happen?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I can only imagine what it's like to be given that information. And I know that many people who were told, you have this many months or you can expect a year, maybe 3. And that was 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's got to be extremely difficult. Yeah.
How does that impact you personally and professionally?
Yeah. I think for me, personally, it just means that I need to be aware of that and need to be aware that somebody who's been living with HIV for 10 plus years and who may have been given that type of information early on, that hasn't necessarily gone away for them. That's still somewhere, casting a shadow or a cloud over their thinking. And professionally, it means that we need to be aware as an organization that we have long-term survivors who have needs that are different, and that we need to be aware of what those needs are and make sure that we're providing for them.
So that kind of gets us into, you mentioned a little bit earlier about the changing of the name, and we kind of just brushed over the reason why. Could you tell folks why the name changed?
Yes.
Why was that so important?
Yeah. So as we looked at expanding services to the broader LGBT community, and again, knowing that it was critically important to do that if we wanted to end the HIV epidemic, that unless we address the health inequities in the LGBT community, it would be extremely difficult to really end the epidemic. So as we looked at what does that expansion of services look like, and we looked at the first services that we would expand: mental health services, nutrition, PrEP services, and housing for homeless youth. And we knew, okay, if we're going to expand those services beyond those living with HIV to those that are members of the LGBT community, how are we going to market that? How are we going to attract those new individuals to these services? Are they going to feel comfortable going to an AIDS organization if they don't have AIDS, if they're not HIV positive?
Right.
And one of the things we learned early on is when we first were funded by the CDC to do prevention work, we knew from that experience that we couldn't as effectively do that work as an AIDS organization as we could with some other type of name. So we created a DBA for that CDC prevention project, because we knew that young men were not going to come to anything being put on by an AIDS organization if they themselves weren't living with HIV or AIDS. So we understood that conceptually. And so as we looked at how do we, again, market ourselves and brand ourselves in a way that will be appealing to this broader community, we realized we had to lose the word AIDS and HIV from our name.
And I think that's something that's kind of nationwide. A lot of agencies are going through this new rebranding.
Yes.
From where I'm standing, from the advocacy point, I started to think when I heard about the name change was, oh wow, they're gonna target negative LGBT and heterosexual people, straight people, before they get infected. So that's like a preventive now. Like, for me, I was like, genius. that's smart
Yeah.
because I want to introduce into the conversation the U equals U project, the undetectable equals untransmittable.
Yeah.
Because that came in and just kind of swooped everybody.
Yeah.
Between that and prep, it was like everybody was, and the gay community was happy and beyond. But I think you guys did that change just at the right moment.
Thank you.
When all these other new, again, I talk about all these new things that people have to play with now.
Right.
Prep and U equals U. Did that make any impact? Did that make, like, was that anything? Did it play in any of the changes, or did it come after you started making the process of the change?
It was all part of it. So we had been considering expanding services to include medical services for about the last 3 years. We as an organization, the board, had been considering this for 3 years now. And so part of considering that was understanding that we had PrEP, this new tool out there. And again, looking at, you had mentioned this a little earlier, that other AIDS service organizations were understanding that they needed to do one of three things. They needed to merge, grow, or go.
Yeah.
So merge with another organization who's doing more or expanded work, grow or expand your own mission outside of HIV/AIDS to include a broader community, or figure out how you would responsibly close your doors and who would you then refer your clients out to for services. Because in the AIDS service community, we realized that funding specific to HIV and AIDS issues was going to be impacted the longer we're around, the longer people are aware of the disease. Also with the Affordable Care Act, we knew that there was potential shifts in funding around medical care and how people living with HIV and AIDS were receiving medical care and treatment. So all of those various factors played into and part of the decision making around the rebrand for the organization. What, for instance, the Ohio AIDS Resource Center, they rebranded as Equitas. So again, I think a play on health equity in their name. But it's common, this is again is what a number of AIDS service organizations have done, expanded, broadened services to the broader LGBT community, and then understanding that, okay, now if we are really going to market to and attract, how does our brand and name align with what we're trying to do in our goals?
What was the client reception on the name change?
Yeah, it was
I asked it to laugh.
Yeah, it was extremely positive.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that I was probably most concerned with. And in fact, one of the focus groups that we had held with a number of our clients, and I asked it very directly. I said, how do you all feel as people living with HIV that we as your provider, very focused on addressing your HIV/AIDS needs, that we're going to remove HIV and AIDS from our name? And one of the participants said, well, I'll be honest with you. She says, when I call and coordinate my transportation to come to your offices, which is done through a public cab company, she said, I tell them I'm going to the business across the parking lot because I don't want to tell them I'm coming to AIDS Services Foundation.
Oh, wow.
She says, now I will gladly tell them I'm going to Radiant Health Centers.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That we, within the HIV community, some of us still have that stigma.
Yeah.
For ourselves. Not even,
Right.
Nobody's doing it to us,
Right.
but ourselves. And
I think we realize, people living with HIV, people that work in the HIV field, that stigma's still there.
Yeah.
We know it. We sense it. We feel it. You know, that look you get from somebody when you tell them and they say HIV/AIDS, and you know right away that's kind of hit them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
This is going to be one of those haha questions, but do you see an end to stigma?
That's a really good question. I think we will get there. I really do. I think when we can declare an end to the epidemic, number one. Number two, when HIV testing becomes so routine that every individual will be able to say, oh yeah, I get an annual HIV test. And when most people can say, oh yeah, I know somebody living with HIV, I think that's when we really begin to see the stigma erased. A lot of people can say, I know somebody that's died of HIV, but when we have as many people saying, I now know somebody living with HIV, I think that will be a big shift in eliminating stigma.
And I say fortunately because I found out about it, but I received a lot more compassion and calls and notes when I was diagnosed with cancer than where there was a treatment and a cure for my case versus when I was diagnosed with HIV. Mind you, it was 18 years ago, but still the difference. Yeah. And then not long ago, one of the a Spanish radio station that I would go and do some work for, they weren't calling me back, and I was wondering why they weren't inviting me back. And then I would tune in, and they were there, and who was doing my job on the station, somebody else was doing my job, and I was like, oh. Well, I later found out that the owner of the station heard, and I think I must have told them, because I don't hide it, that I was positive, and told the DJs not to invite me back.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I can't believe, and it hurt, and it stung for a little bit, but then I was like, for me, I was more determination. I'm like, I really got to get out there and do more stuff in Spanish. Like,
good for you.
This is, like, I've dealt, no, and actually, I hadn't dealt with that, but I've dealt with people who have that ideas, and I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to do about this? Like, how am I going to retaliate in a good way that makes it good for everybody? But yeah, I look forward for everybody listening out there. If you think you don't know anybody, you probably do. And if you want to know somebody, just get a hold of me. We'll talk. I will. So we're at the point now in my show where we share some words of wisdom with my listeners and viewers. So, Yaeger, what words of wisdom do you have for folks?
I would say to folks, if I was to have the opportunity to espouse any words of wisdom, I would say, know your status, get tested. HIV is no longer a death sentence. Undetectable equals untransmittable. And come out for AIDS Walk on May 5th.
Good plug there, sir. Good plug. Bravo. Yeah, I think for anybody who has never been exposed to people who are HIV positive, or for, I always forget the word that they use, but allies, there we go, allies. I think AIDS Walk is one of the most brilliant things. I mean, you can just go there and walk and hear stories. Mm-hmm. Before we finish, we're down to the last 10 minutes. Think of you 25 years ago when you first walked in here. What's qualifications, what specialties, what was unique about young Philip that made him a prime candidate to work in an environment like this in HIV and AIDS?
Probably a couple of things. Probably one being a young gay man. At the time I was my early 30s, 31 years old. I had just left 10 years of living in the Mammoth Lakes area, so a resort community. So there was a part of me that wanted to connect with a group, with an organization, something that was involved in the gay community. So I think that had a lot to do with who I was at that point. So it was wanting to make a difference, wanting to be involved, but wanting to be involved in a way that helped my community, that I was beginning to feel a part of. I think you combine that with my upbringing, and as I mentioned, the fact that I had seen both of my parents always involved in community service and volunteering and giving back to the community. That I think as well conditioned me to be the fit that I was for the organization.
And in the last 25 years to date, what would you consider one of the most important lessons you've learned about yourself?
Boy, there have been so many lessons I've learned.
We got time. Throw us a couple.
So, probably one of the biggest lessons I learned was to focus less on perfection and trying to be perfect or do things right, rather focusing on what is the right thing to do. So really making sure that regardless of anything else, it's always the right time to do the right thing.
I like that. I wanted to give it a little space because I want to edit that out and use that for later. I'd like you to look at the camera and invite people, because there's always room for volunteers. There's always room for help. And along with your information to Radiant, I'd like you to look at the camera and invite people to volunteer or to donate some time or donate money, and then let them know where you're located.
Sure. Very good. So I would invite all of you to get involved with Radiant Health Centers. We're an incredible organization that's making an incredible impact in Orange County and the health of Orange County. There's so many ways that you can get involved and support the work that we do through volunteering your time, whether it be in the office here, delivering food to people who are homebound, or helping transport individuals to or from medical appointments. There's always a way to support the incredible work that we do. Then there's also other ways to support what we do for the community and through the community, and that's through events like AIDS Walk that I mentioned earlier, which will be held on May 5th at William Mason Park in Irvine. I believe we'll be starting around 7:30, 8 a.m., but you can go online, www.radianthealthcenters.org, and there will take you to a link to sign up for AIDS Walk, and also a link to sign up to volunteer as well. So please take a look at the website, come out and volunteer, come out and help us raise money through AIDS Walk, and get involved in the community. Thank you so much.
Perfect timing with the airplanes. For those of you listening, or maybe you just followed us now, we're very near John Wayne Airport, so there's always planes flying over.
Yep.
It just makes for good background noise. So we're down to the end. Any final message? Any final thoughts?
I just want to thank you, Daniel, for the work that you do, and for everything that you're doing to bring awareness around HIV and AIDS, to help reduce the stigma associated with HIV and AIDS, and to really educate the community on how to keep themselves safe and how we're really creating a healthy Orange County together. So thank you for everything that you do, Daniel.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. That was unexpected. I assure you I did not pay you for that. Well, thank you. I mean, I've been, I came in to AIDS Source Foundation about 9 years ago when I moved to California, and I didn't really know anybody, and I didn't know where to go for services or anything. And luckily, I've said this in other places, luckily when you typed in AIDS services, the first thing that came up was AIDS Services Foundation. So I walked in here looking for a doctor, looking for food, because I wasn't working. I'd broken up with my boyfriend. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any food. So you guys gave me therapy. Y'all gave me food. Hooked me up with a doctor, my medications. Were there with any issues that I had? I've been through a couple of workshops through here, some great support groups. And then I went off and became my own case manager, and after all these years, you kind of just do it. You just know where to go. But then the opportunity came, and I got the call to come in and volunteer and help. And then one of my bucket list things was to be a tester, and you guys sponsored me to be a certified tester and counselor, and that's huge. People think of that as a huge thing, and I didn't really realize how big it was until I tell people, like, I'm certified. Like, oh wow. So I want to thank you, and I hope you'll pass this thank you along to everybody else. I can proudly say I'm one of those full circle clients that I came in sad and alone and lonely, and you guys just kind of held me for a little bit and built me back up. I came from Texas, where I knew everything in Houston, how to do everything, how to handle everything. And I came here and knew nothing, and it was a whole different system than Texas. And you guys held me, picked me up, dusted me off, and like, you know what you're doing, go do it. And I just took off, and then you guys called, and I was like, of course, like, whatever you need. And Chris Bragg is one of my favorite people here. Yeah. Chris called, and I'm like, what time and where? Just let me know. So I want to thank you. And not just that, you're always so kind and so approachable. And I think that's huge, because I've come from places where the directors are very standoffish, and it's like, I can't be friendly with the clients. But every time that I've seen you, I just want to say hi, and you're so receptive. And so thank you for being Absolutely. Just an awesome person.
Thank you.
Not just a great executive director, but an awesome person. And to take the time to sit here with me, it's really cool. So,
my pleasure.
Thank you. So before we get into a whole kissing butt session here, again, will you remind the folks where you are located and how to get a hold of you?
Our main office. Yeah, main office is in Irvine. Our number is 949-809-5700. The receptionist can direct your call to our volunteer coordinator, to our director of events, to our director of development if you'd like to make a cash donation. And then look us up online, www.radianthealthcenters.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much. For everybody listening, again, Yaeger, thank you so much. Executive Director and CEO of Radiant Health Centers here in Northern California. For those of you listening, you know the links and information will be on the Facebook page. So go to Put It Together Podcast on Facebook. Everything will be there. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, just look down below and everything will be there, highlighted for you. Thank you, Philip.
Absolutely.
For Abnormal Entertainment and Little Mexican Productions, this is Daniel Garza saying, hey, put it together.